everyone, Carol here at Oak House Journals, and thank you so much for joining me again today. Week 10 of the Tags Handmade had a prompt to use circles and to wrap washers, and I posted a video showing these two additional makes that I had done for week 10. And that's prompted one or two of you to get in touch to say, how do I wrap my washers? Was there a knack or a trick to doing it? Well, basically, no. I've done exactly the same thing as Anne has done in her video for week 10 and the prompt for week 10. So I will put the link in the description box down below again for that. But I did promise that when I started my next project where I was going to use washers, that I would try and do a quick tutorial for you. So that's what I'm going to do today. This is my next project, or the one I'm working on at the moment. This time I tried to do a little bit of embroidery on some dried leaves. Now, this is a work in progress. It's not particularly going as well as I thought it would. These are a couple of just dried oak leaves that I got from my oak tree, and I've coated them with matte medium to make them a lot more flexible and pliable for sewing into. And this is what it looks like when it's on the piece of rusted fabric, and this is my black thread as I'm trying to do some stem stitch on there. But as you can see, the multi-matte medium is beginning to lift in places, so I might need to give that an extra coat, but it's a work in progress, and if it works, great, and if it doesn't, well, I've learned a lesson then. So I will be putting some washers on this one in due course, but I just popped it on here so that you could just see that I'm on with my next project. And these are some of the washers that I've done previously for my projects. So they're just normal DIY washers, metal washers that have come from my local DIY shop in our village. And if you saw one of my videos recently, you will have seen that Maggie got me a box of 1,000 of these, so I've got plenty of opportunity to wrap them. So these are nothing special, but you don't have to use washers. You can use an old keychain, a curtain ring, rubber washers. You can use pieces of wire wrapped round. I have some plastic washers here, and I'm going to do a quick tutorial using one of the big ones so that you can see what I'm doing. But they're very simple. They really are very, very simple. And the technique that you use on these to wrap them, you can also do on twigs. And I've got a twig here that I'll show you in a moment how we wrap it. So let's get started. I've got off to one side here a big plastic washer, and I've also got some much thicker twine than I would normally use. And the reason I've got this is because this is a big washer. If I use finer twine on it, you won't be able to see what I'm doing. For these, I've used the Superfine Steph Francis fine silk threads. Now, I only use these because I have them in my stash. I've had them there for years and I love using them, but also because I embroider my projects with these, I wanted my washers to have the same colours, so I've used them to wrap my washers. But also my washers are very small. I mean, that one's just over a centimetre, that one is a centimetre, and these are about 0.5 of a centimetre, so they're very, very small washers. And if you use thicker thread, obviously you're not going to get many wraps round your washers, and they're not going to look as neat or as fine. But you don't have to use the Steph Francis threads. I always feel that I'm banging on about Steph Francis, but please, I'm not on commission. It's just that so many of you ask me where I get bits and bobs from that I'm quite happy to share, and I do get a lot of my embroidery threads from Steph Francis. These are ones, as I say, that I've had in my stash for ages. I've used them for years. They're still going strong, although I have ordered some new ones recently. But I will put the link in the description box down below, as always, but that's the only reason I mentioned Steph Francis, everybody. You could, if your washers were big enough, you could use crochet cotton. You could use Gutman's thread, sewing thread. You certainly can use your use your DMC threads or flosses, or if you don't have DMC, you could use Anchor. Anything will do to wrap your washers. I mean, I've recently done one where I've wrapped a washer with wire just to see how that would look. With your embroidery flosses, you could use just one thread of your stranded floss or cotton, or 2 or 3, depending on what you want. So there's no hard and fast rule to any of this, other than what you've got in your stash, what size your washer is, and what you're doing with the rest of your project. So for me, I use this because I'm embroidering my projects with this, and my washers are small. So I hope that helps. You don't have to use a darning needle or a tapestry needle. I mean, both of those by definition will have not a sharp point on them. They're just a little bit more forgiving, but equally any old sewing needle would work as well. And actually you could use a crochet hook. So let's get started. Now, I'm right-handed, so apologies if you're left-handed. I can't help you there. What I'll do is I'll try and bring the camera down a little bit and see if that will help. So here we go. So I've got my washer in my left hand, and I've got my end of thread also in my left hand, and all I'm doing is I'm just going to hold it with my index finger between the washer, like so. I've got my thread here, and I'm just going to drape that thread over the back of my finger to get it out of the way. I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to put it through the hole middle of my washer and bring it through. Now, because you've got that thread wrapped around your fingers, it's making a loop. Can you see? So I'm just going to pull it tight. Now, if your thread starts going off to this side, just bring it round to the top. And as you can see, I'm just pulling my thread. Now, that's what it looks like on the back. It might look like that, or it might come further forward. But basically, your thread has gone underneath, like so. Okay, so I've got my loop there, and my thread is underneath. Okay, now you're still hanging on to this loose piece of thread that you've got here. You need to keep that tight for a couple of stitches, and with this one I suggest you just hold it again. And we're about to do our next stitch. So through the hole and out, whoops, a daisy, through the hole in the washer and out the other side. And I'm just taking up the slack again. And again, you can see it's trying to go off to the left there. So I'm just bringing it back out. Let my loop go. And I'm just, as you can see, just pulling it like so. And again, it's underneath. And I'm just tightening it up by pulling this thread. Again, just hold it for the time being. So the thread is behind you, through the loop. It's trying to go off to the left again. Can you see here? So I'm just, sometimes when you just pull it, it will come round for you. and then just tighten it up like so. So again, through your hole in the middle of the washer, pull your thread. It's going round again, doesn't want to go round. And so basically all you're doing is blanket stitch through your hole, pull it tight. And honestly, this is so easy to do once you get going, when you're watching the television at night. And that's how I've done these, just watching telly. And you can literally switch off, watch the telly, and just wrap your washers. Now, I'm just tightening my knot, and my ridge is forming on the top there. Can you see? So where you're getting that little loop thread going underneath, every time you do it, you get a little ridge. Now, if you were doing normal embroidery, flat on fabric, that would be against the fabric, that little ridge. But this time, it's obviously resting on the top of your washer. Now, as you go round, I just make sure I just keep my stitches all close together, try and keep my tension even. Now, as you get going, you can let that piece go. And normally, I have to say, I would have a bigger tail, if you will, than that. For the simple reason that when you go all the way round, let me show you on these. This is let's find one with a tail for you, and true to form, I haven't got one. Okay, so when you've gone all the way round, and I will show you that in a minute, you will have two pieces of thread here at the end, one where you finished off and the other which was your tail from where you started. Now, those I tend to leave because those are what I use to anchor my washer down onto my finished piece. So on here, I will have taken this thread down through my fabric to secure my washer on my piece of fabric. But also what I tend to do is I put on the reverse, I put a little bit of fabric glue, and I use Beacon 3-in-1 glue. So I put a little dab of that, not much at all, and then I would use my thread to actually secure my washer in place. Now, I don't mind if I find that, like this one, my thread runs out halfway along my washer and I need to start again, and I'll show you how to do that in a minute. I leave those threads hanging loose because I will use that thread to anchor my washer down on the right hand side, and that thread, even though it's that small, to anchor it down on the left hand side. So ideally I should have left a bigger tail on this side here, my starting thread, so that I could anchor this washer down, but I can still do that with this bit, not a problem at all. Now, I know that the thread that I've got here is not enough to go all the way around that washer, but I'm not bothered in the slightest. I don't know if there's a rule of thumb to gauge how much thread you need. If you want to go all the way around, you're just going to have to wing it, I'm afraid. But as I say, I don't mind if my thread runs out, and I'm going to show you why. Because say my thread ran out as I got round my washer, I would make sure that I still had quite a big tail, because I'm going to use that. Now, you could leave it if you wanted to and use this. You could carry on as normal with this and just start again and just butt up your stitches and leave that and use this thread to stitch into your project to hold your washer in place. Or what I tend to do is I just get that piece of thread to one side and I start again as if I was just starting on my washer. So there's my tail, just resting it on the back of my washer, same as we did just now, and I'm just pinching it in place. Now this is where it does get a little bit fiddly, because what we're going to do is we're going to try and trap this piece of thread, not this piece, but this piece of thread. We're going to try and trap it underneath our stitches for a few stitches, so it does get in the way a little bit. So let's do what we did before. I'm getting rid of that out of the way, just giving myself a little bit more thread. I'm going through my washer, the center of my washer, through to the back, same as we've done all along, and then I'm just beginning to tighten up my stitch, and I'm making sure that that loose piece of thread is going to go, let me just pull it through, is going to go under our loop as well, okay? And then I'm just tightening up my stitch. Now what I tend to do is make sure that this loose piece of thread is either on the top or on the back of my washer. It's neater if it's on the back, because obviously you won't see that, because it's your piece of fabric or piece of work will hide it. But you can equally let it sit along the top and lie underneath these little knots that you're doing. The only thing with that is that it can alter the size of your ridge for the couple of stitches where you're trapping this thread. So let's do this again. We've got it trapped once, but it's still not quite secure. So again, I would go through, do my stitch, and as I'm tightening up that stitch, I'm just making sure that loop is caught in there. And I've done another one. Okay, let's do a few more. So through my, whoops, through to the back. As I say, it does get a little bit tricky, making sure that that thread is caught. Another stitch, and it's just made a little bit of loop. It's not, so I'm just straightening out, that's all. Once you've done one or two, it gets really easy. Oopsie-daisy, she says, not making sure that she's made her loop properly. As I say, as you've done one or two, it does get easier, everybody. Tightening that up again, just giving that little thread a little yank. Haven't really left myself much thread here to use. Pulling that loose piece of thread through my loop, and again, and through my loop, and again, and through my loop. Does help if it's not all the same colour as well, because it all blends in. There we go. Through my loop again. So when you've done 2 or 3 stitches, you can actually chop this piece off, because those stitches are holding it nice and secure from the last piece. Now, so let me chop that off. So I now know that where this ended, which was here, that finishing piece of thread is trapped nicely under those stitches there. Now what you do have though is you have your starting piece of thread for the second piece that you did. Now you can use that to anchor down your project, if you, or your washer rather, if you didn't snip off the earlier piece, then this piece, your first part of stitching, could unravel before you get chance to anchor it down, and you'll also have 2 lots of threads here, wouldn't you? So I suggest that the best way to do it is to anchor your thread underneath your next row of stitches or your next lot of stitches and snip off the excess, and then use your tail from the second lot of stitching as your anchor. So you could go all the way round like so. And the same thing happens when you get to this end. Now, you could carry on doing your stitches all the way round until you get there, and then you would have your initial tail and you would have this thread. Or what you could do is, as you get closer to the start of your work, just lay that down and stitch over it as you come up to this piece here. And that way this tail, initial tail of thread would be anchored down, and when you get round to this end with your working thread, then you will only end up having one working thread there. So that's a way I have been working to hide my threads as I've gone around, but to leave myself with a couple of threads that I can use to anchor my work down when I come to stitch it in place. You don't even have to stitch it in place, everybody. I mean, you could just glue these onto your project if you want to, or you know, if you're putting them on fabric, or you could use them for another purpose. So this is just like, almost like making Dorset buttons, except you've got your ridge on your outside. You can, once you've finished your piece, force that ridge round to the inside if you want to. That works equally as well. And in fact, that's what you actually do with Dorset buttons. So I hope you could follow that, everybody. Just a couple of suggestions what you can do with your threads. Now, I did say that I would show you how you can use that idea on a twig. Now, we're working even smaller here, everybody. So this is some I've already done, and it's exactly the same principle. I've started it off in exactly the same way by trapping a piece of thread next to my twig and then doing the stitch. It's as simple as that. It really is. So that's my stitch. I'm just tightening it up. I'm pulling it along. So this time, as you're working on a twig, you're working linear. You're not working in a circle, you're working linear. The only thing I would say to you is that just watch that top ridge doesn't begin to twist round your twig as you're working. If you want that ridge in a straight line along a particular edge of your twig, then you need to just keep tweaking it as you go and twisting it round slightly. But it's exactly the same technique if you want to wrap a twig in this fashion. I mean, when I've done a couple of my projects using twigs, I have done it both ways. I have let that ridge spiral round the twig, and I like that effect, or I have just let it I've just corrected it so that it's gone in a straight line. And this one I'm not correcting, I'm just letting it begin to spiral. You do just need to keep pushing your stitches close together, but again, you don't have to do that. If you like, ooh, she says, as soon as I get the camera up close, I start getting into a mess. If you wanted elongated stitches, so you could do something like that. Let me just try and get another stitch in place. You could create like a little, so you've got your ridge here and your stitches, then you've got a line of thread along the top of the twig just here, and then my stitches are starting again there. So you could do that sort of thing if you wanted to. The world's your oyster with anything like this. It really is. Let me tighten that one up again. You could swap and change your threads by using the same technique of trapping your starting thread behind your stitches. So you could change the colour of your thread. You don't even need to, if you want to wrap these twigs, everybody, you don't even need to secure your stitches like this. You could do a very simple bog standard wrap round like so. But you would need to trap your thread to stop it from unravelling. And you would probably need to do one of these little stitches. Let me just do this at the end to stop it all unravelling. So that's very close, probably too close and fine for you to see, but that's all you do if you want to use this technique on a twig. As I say, you could do the stitches to get your little ridge if you wanted to, or you could just wrap it and then do a couple of stitches at the end to just knot it in place. Okay, everybody, I hope that helped with you wrapping your washers. As I say, no great technique to any of this. It can be fiddly if you're using finer thread and smaller washers, but you just kind of have to hang in there if you want to work to that size. Thanks so much, everybody, for watching, and as always, if you've got any questions or if I can help at all, just leave me a comment and I'll try and get back to you. Take care, everybody. Bye bye now.